Good evening. Tens of thousands of people have taken part in a huge civil rights rally in Washington, demanding racial justice and an end to police brutality. It comes on the anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington, when Dr. Martin Luther King made his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Today's rally comes after a week of protests and violent clashes in the city of Kenosha in Wisconsin, following the police shooting of an unarmed black man, Jacob Blake, now feared paralyzed, and 3 months after the death of George Floyd. President Trump didn't address problems with the police while officially launching his re-election campaign last night. Instead, he attacked what he called anarchists and agitators among civil rights protesters. More on that in a moment, but first let's go live to our correspondent Barbara Plett Usher at the March on Washington rally. Barbara.
Clive, it's been quite a day of crushing heat and blistering words and passionate stories, but more than anything, a call to action for the civil rights movement of today, drawing inspiration from that iconic march nearly 60 years ago.
In the year of 2020, this is what a march on Washington looks like. Drawing on the anger and energy of months of unrest around the country, now bringing their demands to the doorstep of power, aiming to forge a national movement out of their protests.
The widely heralded and in some quarters feared March on Washington.
They're deliberately connecting their modern-day struggle to the historic civil rights movement, the unprecedented march of 1963 that brought 250,000 people to Washington with a thunderous roar, demanding jobs and freedom. Nearly 60 years later, it's clear that not enough has changed.
I'm 33, and this was in my parents' time, so it's just like, okay, here we go again. So we're trying to make sure that we don't have to keep reliving this whole thing all over again.
I was not born when the first march happened, but I will be part of every movement if I need to until I go to my grave, until we get the justice and the equality that we deserve.
No justice, no peace.
The summer of discontent was fueled by the police killing of a black man, George Floyd. One name in a long list, an explosion of anger that has been building for years. Organizers believe this is the historical moment to push for concrete change.
What is this about? This is about equal treatment for black Americans, for them to be treated the same as white people, by the police and in other areas. That's what Black Lives Matter is about. And who would have thought nearly 60 years after one of the most famous civil rights rallies in U.S. history, they'd be back here again, demanding basic rights.
I'm marching for George, for Brianna, for Ahmaud, for Jacob.
Not in the same numbers, the pandemic has thinned the crowds. But everyone here can recite the grim roll call of names of those killed and injured by police violence. Their family members were the headline speakers, calling this generation to action.
How would the history books remember you? What will be your legacy? Will your future generations remember you for your complacency, your inaction? Or will they remember you for your empathy, your leadership, your passion?
As in 1963, the march is pushing for national legislation to reform how America is policed and to protect their voting rights, building on hard-won victories of the past.
We are going to be the generation that dismantles systemic racism once and for all, now and forever. We are going to be the generation that calls a halt to police brutality and gun violence once and for all, now and forever.
That this is happening in an election year added urgency to the agenda. Again and again, speakers called on protesters to get out and vote. There is hope. The proof of that will come later, maybe much later. Whether this is a decisive inflection point in a long struggle, or whether they'll be marching on Washington with the same demands in 50 years' time. Barbara Plett Usher, BBC News, Washington.
Donald Trump has warned that his Democratic opponent, Joe Biden, will demolish the American dream if he wins the White House in November. Speaking on the final night of the Republican convention, he said Joe Biden would unleash violent anarchists upon cities across the United States. Our North America editor, Jon Sopel, has more.
An understated entrance, it wasn't. If Hollywood did coronations, this is what they'd look like. On the south lawn of the White House, the president took to the stage. giant screens with the Trump-Pence logo. Before him, over 1,000 supporters with no social distancing and few masks. Last night, the People's House became a party political convention venue, and the speech was as norm-defying as the setting.
Not a problem.
He was introduced by daughter Ivanka, who acknowledged that he's not always the easiest.
I recognize that my dad's communication style is not to everyone's taste, and I know that his tweets can feel a bit unfiltered. But the results speak for themselves.
And then it was the president's turn. We didn't learn much about what a second term would look like, but we did hear a lot about the existential threat that Joe Biden would pose if he were elected.
This election will decide whether we save the American dream or whether we allow a socialist agenda to demolish our cherished destiny.
The president didn't mention Jacob Blake, shot 7 times in the back by a white police officer in Kenosha, Wisconsin, or concerns about racial injustice. But of the violence that followed, there was plenty.
In the strongest possible terms, the Republican Party condemns the rioting, looting, arson, and violence we have seen in Democrat-run cities all, like Kenosha, Minneapolis, Portland, Chicago, and New York, and many others, Democrat-run.
On COVID, the president tried to paint a picture of success, even though 180,000 Americans have died, and again invoked apocalyptic imagery if Joe Biden won.
The cost of the Biden shutdown would be measured in increased drug overdoses, depression, alcohol addiction, suicides, heart attacks, economic devastation, job loss, and much more.
The speech ended with fireworks over the Washington Monument, spelling out Trump 2020. And half a mile away, a peaceful Black Lives Matter protest. Polarized America. But come November, one side is going to lose and see its ambitions go up in smoke. And because of the protest, this is what Washington looks like this evening, boarded up and gridlocked. Now, with regards to the conventions, Donald Trump will be happy with the way his convention has gone. He tried to broaden out his appeal. One problem that he has is this. 4 years ago, he said he would stop the violence immediately as soon as he became president. It has continued. He is also saying that only he can deal with the coronavirus outbreak, even though it has cost America so dear. As one commentator has put it, he seems to be suggesting that only Donald Trump can save America from Donald Trump's America.
Jon, thanks for that. Jon Sopel there in Washington.